Hi there. So today I'm going to be building a stand for a modular synthesizer, and I'm doing this project for a friend who's building up the synthesizer, and he's asked me if I could build a stand to hold it at an angle for him. And I pulled up a few images here just in case you're not familiar with what a modular synthesizer is. Essentially, it is a bunch of small modules that you fit together in a rack. They look something like these things. You bolt them all together in this rack, and essentially you plug them together with jack cables, and then you make music with them, which is what he's going to be doing. So the case that he's actually bought is this one, and there's the dimensions there. It's 21.5 inches long, just over 5 inches wide, and then 2 3/4 inches deep. And here are a few more images of that stand just to give you a better idea of what it looks like. Here's a case with it fully populated. So yeah, I'm going to be making a stand to fit this into. So I've actually modeled the case in SketchUp, and this is the exact dimensions of the case. I made sure because I went around his house and actually measured it. And interestingly, it's got these feet on the bottom. These are actually little rubber feet. And the nice thing about these is they're actually offset. So it means that the stand that I build can have a piece that runs in between here, and actually that can be the thing that holds it and stops it sliding off. So my friend had a few ideas on how he might want the stand. And he sent them over to me in a rough sketch, and together we've kind of come up with a plan that I think will work in wood, which is over here. And this is with the case on it. You can see it's got those rubber feet spanning the end sections here. Let me just remove that so you can see it a bit better. So the stand is pretty simple. It's made from 3 pieces, and they are joined together with a mortise and tenon through joint like this. And the nice thing about this is that it can be used actually either way around. So at the moment this is set at a 30-degree angle, so the synth will be obviously held at that angle. But if you wanted to rotate it, then you can actually have it up this way, and then the synth will be held at a 60-degree angle, which I think is probably the angle that he'll use it at the most. So should be pretty easy to make, and I've got a few old floorboards that I can use to make it out of. So let's have a go. So I have these leftover floorboards, which are solid wood, but they are engineered, so they have these tongue and groove sides on them, which I'll need to cut off. They also have a protective kind of coating, and they also have these grooves that run along the back. So I'll need to cut all of that off, and I'll do that on the table saw. So after cutting and trimming these boards, I've got 3 pieces that have ended up with a final thickness of about 14.5 millimeters, which is a little bit thinner than I would have liked, but should be fine. So the next step is to cut out the pieces that I need, and the way that I'm going to cut out the end pieces is on this board here. I think I can get both pieces out of it, and if I cut it in this way, then I can get the grain running parallel to the cutout, which should make the mortise that I have to cut a little bit easier. So I'm going to mark it out on this board and cut those out. Unfortunately, I don't have a mitre gauge to be able to cut the angles that I need. So I've made this little jig to help cut those angles. This is at 60 degrees and this is at 30 degrees, and I've added some extra blocks here to be able to clamp it to the table saw sled as I run it through. So the next thing I need to do is to cut off these corners at various 30 and 60 degree angles. So I'll mark that out and do that now. To cut these shoulder pieces, I'm just going to set the table saw to the right height and run it through this way. To make the final cut along here, I'll use the jigsaw to get pretty close to the line, and then I will tidy it up on the router. So I've come fairly close to the line here, and I'm just going to square it up on the router table. I've set up the fence so that it is about 30 millimeters from the center of the bit, and I've got a 10 millimeter bit in here, which means that the depth of this will end up being 35 millimeters. Unfortunately, the router bit is not high enough to go all the way through the stock, so I'm going to have to run it through one way, flip it over, then run it through again. So that's got it pretty close. I couldn't get right into the edge, obviously, with the router, so I'll just clean that up with a chisel. For the mortise and tenons, Obviously the mortise is going to be cut into here. The tenon will be on the end of this rail. I'm going to cut the tenon joints first because the distance in between those tenons is probably the most crucial dimension on the whole project, so I need to get that right. To cut the tenons, I'm going to be using this tenoning jig. If you haven't seen one of these before, it's basically a kind of a H-shaped piece of wood that fits over the fence and holds the stock vertically in both directions while you run it through the table saw. The most critical thing with these is you obviously want this to be completely vertical, so with respect to the bed of the table saw, and also this upright piece here is also completely vertical. I've set the height of the blade to be the height of the tenon, and now I just need to set the width of it. I copied the design for this jig from a video by Colin Connect at Woodwork Web, so I'll put a link in the description below if you're interested in building it. Now I'm just going to use the crosscut sled to make the cut this way by setting the height of the blade to this height. Now I need to mark the positions of the mortises on these outside pieces. To be able to clamp this piece is quite tricky because it's got this strange shape on the top of it. So I created this jig out of some scraps to be able to hold it square, and cut this square piece to fit in here. So hopefully that'll hold it tight. just doing a test fit here of the tenons. This one is quite tight, so probably need to just pare that one down a little bit. This one is quite loose, probably more loose than I would like ideally, but I'll probably wedge it in there by putting a splice in here. You might have also noticed on that footage that this bit came off, which is annoying, but I think that'll glue back on. So I deliberately cut these tenons a little bit long because I definitely didn't want to cut them too short, but I quite like the fact that they're sticking out a little bit, and this is too much at the moment, but I'm going to trim them down and leave them a few millimeters out, and then I'm going to bevel the edges just to give it a nice kind of end profile. As one of the tenons is quite loose anyway, I'm going to cut a couple of slots fairly close to the end for a couple of wedges to go in here. So the guy that I'm making this for is actually a music producer. He's going to be setting his synth stand in here. He goes by the name of 7 Segment. I'll link to he has a YouTube channel, so I'll link to that below. But one of the things I thought would be quite cool to do would be to burn his symbol or his logo into this wood. I thought about doing it right here in the middle, but that's only going to be visible when you've actually got the synth off of the stand, which probably isn't that useful. But I think what I'll do is burn it into the end here, so we'll see how that goes. So I've printed out his logo here, various different scales. I think this is the one that's probably going to fit the best, so I'll try and trace that out onto the wood, and then I'll burn it in using a soldering iron. I think that's come out okay. So my normal go-to finish is something like this Osmo oil, which is just an all-in-one hard wax oil. Looks pretty nice, but for this project I thought I'd go with something a bit different and try and mix up my own finish. So I'm going to try and do that with this varnish, some boiled linseed oil and some white spirit. So this is polyurethane in the US and white spirit is just mineral spirits. So I've mixed up a batch here. This is kind of equal parts of varnish and boiled linseed oil with a touch of white spirit in it just to thin it down a little bit. You can see it's pretty thin there. And I've tried it out on a piece of scrap here. I'm quite liking the finish that's come up on it. This is about 3 coats that I've put on here. Probably needs a couple more, so I think on the final thing I'll need about 5, maybe 6 coats. See how it goes. Pretty pleased with the result in the end. It's come out quite well. The only problem that I had really was with the homemade finish that I created. It took ages to dry, so I was having to wait, 12 hours between coats, which made the whole process take a lot longer than I expected. But the result is nice. It's got a nice feel to it, so quite pleased. So the next step will be to take it over to my friend's place and see whether the synth actually fits.